Good Saturday morning. Welcome to New Thought Talk. I'm the Reverend Steve Walling from the Spiritual Awareness Center, located in beautiful downtown Madera, and I'm glad you're here with me today. When I have the time, and today's one of those days I have the time, one of the things that I really like to do is to share this philosophy that we call New Thought or Science of Mind. And so today we're going to take a little time and we're going to talk about it. In 1938, Ernest Holmes wrote something that I want to share with you this morning, and it goes something like this. The future religion will be free from fear, superstition, and doubt, and will ask no man where God may be found. For the secret place of the Most High will be revealed in the inner sanctuary of man's own heart, and the eternal God will sit enthroned in his own mind. We can know no God external to that power of perception by which alone we are conscious of anything. God must be interpreted to man through man's own nature. We talk about this thing that we call God. Some people get a little upset when I refer to as God as this thing, but God is more than just an anthropomorphic being. God doesn't sit up on some big throne, nor does God walk through the valley or anything else. Because for God to truly be an omnipotent, omnipresent, all-powerful God, all-knowing God, God has to be everywhere. God has to be more than. God has to be more than. And that's the way in New Thought that we understand this thing that we call God. We often refer to it as a power and a presence for good in the universe. And why is that important to understand, that there is a power and a presence in the universe that works for us by working through us and is available to us? Well, I want to share some of that with you today. It was a couple months ago in the Fresno Bee. There was an article on a young lady, and her name is Heaven Viejos. She's 9 years old. And Heaven Viejos goes to Mountain View School. And it's nothing unusual about that. 9-year-old girl going to a school, and she wanted to participate in cross country. Nothing exciting about that. A lot of 9-year-old kids like to do cross country. She made up her mind she's going to do it, and I have a picture here from the paper in front of me of her running. But the headline on this picture says, Blind Runner's Sense of Determination. You see, this young lady was born without the ability to see with her eyes. Now, how many of us, if we didn't have the ability to see, would even begin to contemplate the idea of running cross country in a school event? Do you understand the consciousness of will and desire that it takes to believe that you can do something? And regardless of what the world is telling you, regardless of what you see in everything that's going on around you, regardless of what your family, friends, even possibly your spiritual mentors are telling you, you see a different reality. You see a truth for yourself, and you decide, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it because I know here in my heart, I know I can. And that's this young woman's story. She knew that she could. And so she put it in her mind, and she made a decision to do it, and she made the newspaper front page. But more than that, she made something in her life that no one else can ever take away from her. A sense of accomplishment, a sense of achievement, a sense of purpose, far beyond what most of us get a chance to experience. In our day-to-day lives, the difference between the successful person and the unsuccessful person is just one very simple thing. The successful person is willing to do that one thing that the unsuccessful person is not willing to do. And on a spiritual level, we can take this back to a story out of the Old Testament when Moses is leading the people out of Israel and out of Egypt, and they get to the Red Sea. Obviously, it's an obstacle beyond their ability to overcome. And he tells them to hold up, have faith, and then the obstacle is overcome. And it's not overcome because someone brought in a bunch of bulldozers and built a dam or anything. It's overcome because somebody in consciousness had faith, a faith of something far greater than most of us understand in our day-to-day lives. Now, whether the story of Moses in the Old Testament is reality or is metaphorical doesn't make any difference, because it is a truism that is so powerful when we experience it in our lives today. I had a chance to, on the internet here not too long ago, to watch a young lady, and you can go on the internet and look her up. Her name is Anita Moorjani. And she wrote a book about her experience. And her experience was she had reached a point of illness. She had cancer. She had tumors she described as the size of lemons in her body. And she was at that end state. She was in the hospital. They were calling the family in, come, gather around, give her your last comments, share your last bit of love, because she's not going to be with us. But the story didn't turn out that way. The story turned out so amazingly different, because what happened was she was able to actually see and experience her body lying there, and her husband, her loving husband, being with her, and friends and family coming. And she had, in this experience, she had an occasion to experience her grandmother her mother who had passed on, who came to her and told her that it's not your time, that you're going to be okay. And she began to have an experience within herself, an understanding that she was going to be okay. And she tried to communicate this with her husband. And of course, she was unable to do that. But eventually, she returned to her physicalness, and within very short order, she was okay. To the great disconcernment of the medical profession, who had basically declared her gone, she came back, and she came back quick. She came back powerfully. She came back healthily. Once again, this power, this presence in the universe that is available to us. But we got to open ourselves up to it. And in New Thought, in Science of Mind, that's what we have an understanding of. And when Ernest Holmes wrote these words, the future religion will be free from fear, superstition, and doubt, and will ask no man where God may be found. That's what he was talking about. Because for as long as mankind has walked the face of the earth, fear has been a component of the spiritual experience. We fear God. We fear the gods. We feared God's retribution. We feared the judgment of God. But yet, on the other hand, we say that God is everywhere present, and God is a God of love. And actually, at the time that Jesus, the master teacher, walked the face of the earth, and after he died, in the early days before Christianity actually became a religion, when people were trying to discern what was the true message of Jesus being here and his teachings, there was a belief that there might possibly not be a single God, but there really might be two gods, because the God that Jesus talked about was a God of love and compassion. And the God of the Old Testament was a God of judgment and anger and petulance. And people couldn't understand that. They couldn't make a correlation between that, so they made an assumption. And it was very well received at the time. The fellow that actually coined the idea was a fellow by the name of Marcion, and they called themselves Marcionites after him. He wrote a whole bunch of stuff, and people began to follow, and it caused quite a stir in the early Christian world, as you might imagine. But the understanding, because you see, Jesus did bring a message of a God of love. But there's been so much wrapped up around Jesus. There's been so much laid over what he's taught. There's been so much added to the message that he brought to the world that today as historians began or are working on discovering who Jesus truly is, who he was, what he truly taught, they're seeing that in the earliest writings, things don't necessarily relate to what we find in more current writings, that things have been changed to fit a time, to fit a point of view, to fit a context. There is a fella by the name of Carlton Pearson. He was a minister, a Pentecostal minister down in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Carlton had a church of 6,000 people. Every Sunday, 6,000 people would come and listen to him. And he's still around, and if you get a chance, I highly recommend that you look Carlton up on the internet. He does his talks still, but his talks have a new understanding, a new twist to them. You see, when Carlton was teaching people, sharing the gospel with him, he began to understand something because he started reading the book. He started reading the book in the Greek language. He started reading it as it was written. And what he read and what the translations that he was teaching, as he began to compare one to the other, he found that that's not necessarily the same thing that's being spoken here and being spoken of here and being taught on Sunday. And yet there's so many people that take this and say that this is the absolute and this is what must be taught on Sunday. And he saw something different as he began to go something closer to the original text. And he had questions and he had doubts. One day, I believe it was about 2002, Bishop Carlton Pearson was watching a news show, and he saw there was some women in Rwanda and their little kids, and they were coming back from some decimation of some rebels or whatever had come through, and the damage and the stuff that was done. And he had a flash of understanding. He had a flash of something different than he had ever conceived of before. It was a powerful thought. It changed his whole life, it changed his church, and it has changed the message that Reverend Carlton Pearson brings to the world today. And when we get back from this break, I'll share with you what that message is. Welcome back to New Thought Talk. I am the Reverend Steve Walling from the Spiritual Awareness Center located in beautiful downtown Madera. And before we went to the break, I was sharing with you a story of Bishop Reverend Carlton Pearson. As we went to the break, I was telling you that one morning he was watching the news. One day he's watching the news and he saw this image of these women and their babies in Rwanda after some terrible, like I say, it was a rebel overrun or something. And at that point, Bishop Carlton had what he calls a conversion experience or an awakening. He began to understand something in a totally different light, based on what he had been reading in the texts of the New Testament, in the languages that they were written in. Based on what he was seeing, he began to have a different understanding. Not of a vengeful God, not of a God that keeps a record in judgment, but a God that is for everybody. Whether you've actually heard the word of God or not, the God of all creation is still the God of all creation and is all creation. And he called his new understanding, he called it the gospel of inclusiveness. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. This young lady, Heaven Viejos, she had a thought. She wanted to run. She wanted to do something working through us. So I want to share with you a little more of what Dr. Holmes has written. He wrote that the power that is within you is the power of your word operated upon by law. This is the law that has existed since God, the law that goes back to the very beginning, wherever that is. This power is not so much a will as it is a willingness. You will never have to will things done to have them happen. You will merely have to know that they are happening. The law of cause and effect is the law of knowing, having an expectation, and seeing something made manifest in your life. Knowing that as a blind person, I can run in a cross country and accepting nothing less than that as my truth and seeing it, if you will, unfold. Bishop Carlton Pearson, that day that he was watching TV, had a new knowing. He had a new thought. He had a new understanding. You see, he had been teaching Jesus as what had been taught about Jesus. But he began to understand Jesus in the words that Jesus taught. And oftentimes that's not exactly the same thing. He began to understand that Jesus did come here to bring a message to the world, did come to bring salvation to mankind, but not a salvation of a sacrifice, but a salvation of an understanding that God is the God of all of us, that there is nowhere that God is not, that God is a God of love, and that mankind's understanding up until that point was a very limited understanding. It was an understanding of darkness, almost. It was an understanding that required blood sacrifice. It was an understanding that required bowing down and being in servitude to a judgmental God that played vengeance upon the world. And Jesus said, wait a second. He said, my Father is not that person. He said, my Father is the Father of love. As a matter of fact, he referred to God as Abba, as Daddy, not the Father up there, but Abba. And he said, when you pray to Daddy. He said, when you pray believing, it is done unto you. When you pray knowing, there is a power and a presence for good in the universe that will respond. And that's what he taught. That day, Reverend Pearson, Bishop Pearson, had this understanding. He felt a weight lifted off of him, and he got excited, and he took this understanding back to his church in Tulsa, a church of 6,000 people strong on Sunday. As you might imagine, he wasn't received real well, because there are people that are caught up in an old thought, in an old belief, and there's a fear and a superstition and an understanding that if we vary from this old way of thinking, a superstition that we will be punished. You know, yesterday was Friday the 13th. How many of you managed to avoid black cats or found a crack not to step on? You know, we human beings, we like to hang on to our superstitions. But we've evolved and we've learned a lot. And people that have studied history, that have studied what Christ really taught, what this man Jesus taught, are teaching and understanding that if you can wrap your mind around it, if you can develop a consciousness of this love that he brought to the world, this power that God is in the world, that it is ever available for you, to you by working through you. As you begin to get this, as you begin to embody this, as you begin to understand this, you make a change. Bishop Carlton made a change. Eventually, he was declared a heretic. They asked him to leave his congregation. Now on the wall behind me here, there's a quote from Meister Eckhart. And it says, it is in the darkness that one finds the light. It is in the darkness that one finds the light. You know, one of the reasons why this particular show is kind of around this concept is, as we are approaching the shortest day of the year, the most darkness, you know, historically, throughout the history of mankind, this idea of darkness has been, we have ceremonies and celebrations that celebrate the end of darkness and the beginning of lightness, and we have through all the different religions, and including the celebration of Christ's birth in December, because we know in truth that he was not born in December, but we celebrate it because it was kind of a time when there was a large celebration in the pagan world, and the church decided that it was important that they usurp that. So they did. But it's not really important. What is important is this understanding that there is a darkness that has overcome the world, a shortness of days. And in the world of psychiatry and psychology, they have found that it is in this darkness that humanity begins to develop something, and it is a condition that is called SADS. And it's seasonal affective disorder. It is because of the darkness of light, and we know that it affects our minds. We know that at this time of the year, more people commit suicide. We know at this time of the year, there are higher incidences of depression. But you can know that that doesn't have to be your experience. It's only when we live at a level of unconsciousness of the truth of who we are that we live subject to what's happening around us. A young lady decided that she was going to be a cross-country runner. The darkness didn't bother her a bit. Bishop Carlton Pearson decided that there is a better teaching, a truer teaching that brings light to the world, that if humanity will just embrace this, that possibly things like famine, things like dis-ease, things like war may drop away from the face of the world. That's how powerful this is when you get your mind around it, when you open yourself up to an understanding of the true power that is within each and every one of us. And it starts with you as it starts with me. And on that note, we'll take a break, and I'll see you when we come back. Welcome back to New Thought Talk. I am the Reverend Steve Walling from the Spiritual Awareness Center located in beautiful downtown Madera. And boy, am I glad to be with you today. I hope you've been enjoying the show. We got another half hour left, and I don't know if we got enough time to get everything covered that I want to cover, but let's move right along. And the first thing I want to do is read you a little bit more from Dr. Ernest Holmes. And he says, there is a presence pervading all. There is an intelligence running through all. There is a power sustaining all, binding all into one perfect whole. The realization of this presence, intelligence and power and unity constitutes the nature of that which we call the mystic Christ. And that is found within each and every one of us. It is what we call the Christ within. Now, in the earlier segment, I talked about Anita Moorjani, and I talked about how she had experienced these tumors that were the size of lemons, and how she'd experienced this healing, how she was told that she was going to be healed from something outside of herself. In and of itself, that sounds like a pretty fantastic story. But if you were to go back to the archives of the Journal of American Medical Association magazine, the JAMA, there's a story about a fellow named, for the story's purposes, he was named Mr. Wright. Now, Mr. Wright had cancer. He had tumors that they described in the journal almost the size of grapefruits. He was on his deathbed. He had possibly only hours left to live, maybe a day or two. At the time, there was a new medicine, a new anti-cancer drug that had been developed, and they were testing it in this particular hospital, and the drug was called Cribiacin. And Mr. Wright, he knew with all that he was, if he could get into the study, that this Cribiacin would cure him. But he was so far gone that the doctors in the hospital, they really didn't want to include him in the study. But there was a psychiatrist in the hospital who had been treating Mr. Wright, and he decided to go ahead. He felt sorry for him. And so he included him in the study. He administered the Cribiacin. And this was on a Friday, and in truth, the doctor expected when he returned to the hospital on Monday that Mr. Wright would have expired by that time. But what he found at the hospital on Monday was that Mr. Wright had not only not expired, but he was up walking around. He was touting the benefits of Cribiacin. He was sharing with other patients. He was full of energy, and there was a noticeable reduction just in the weekend period of time in the size of his tumors. And within short order, within about a week to 2 weeks, he was released from the hospital. Now, this was in the 50s, and they didn't have all the sophisticated imaging devices that we have today, but with what they could find at that time, he was apparently cancer-free. And so it was for a period of time until the Journal of American Medical Association made an announcement that carbamazepine seemingly wasn't working. It was literally within a matter of days that Mr. Wright was back in the hospital. His tumors had returned. The doctor that had treated him the first time began to wonder about this. And so he decided on his own that he would try a little experiment. So what he did was he saw Mr. Wright and he told him that the carbamazepine that had been used initially was defective. It was only good for a short period of time, and then the condition would return. But there was a new improved version of carbamazepine out there, and it just so happened that this doctor happened to have a dose of it that he was going to administer to Mr. Wright, and he did. Unbeknownst to Mr. Wright, what was being administered was nothing more than simple saline solution. But once again, within a matter of days, Mr. Wright's tumors had disappeared. He was up. He was apparently healthy. He went back out into the world. Unfortunately, a short time later, the American Medical Association made the announcement that carbamazepine had no effect at all on cancer. And within short order, literally within days, Mr. Wright's tumors returned and his life came to an end. Nothing more than the power of that which is within him. And that same power exists within Anita Moorjani. That same power exists within a young blind girl who knows that she can run cross country. That same power exists within you and me, and it is available to everyone. There is a presence and a power for good, my friends, and it is everywhere. Nowhere that it is not. And this was the discovery, the understanding that Reverend Carlton Pearson came to that day, that when Jesus came to the world, he came to teach an understanding that there is a presence and a power for good available to everyone. And like I say, he took this teaching to his church. And within short order, the organization outside of his church began to complain. And then it hit the newspapers. And then the Sunday services began to fall off. And finally, he had to leave his church. And he was declared a heretic within his own faith. But by that time, he realized that his faith had grown to something greater, to a newer faith in a loving God, in an ever-present God, in a God that is available to each and every one of us, whether we've heard, whether we've had the opportunity to hear any particular word written by any particular man on any particular religion, that God is a God of us all, that there is no place that God is not. And as he understood this, he took and he is now taking this message to the world. You can find Bishop Carlton Pearson online. He's building a new ministry based on new thought, a new thought of a new reality that brings a power and empowerment of each and every one of us to a world that is wanting and waiting for this. If you hear on the evening news that maybe something's going on here, there's lack, limitation, or something there, my friends, pay no attention to it. That is the world of man that is talking to you. And there is a more powerful world of the divine that is available to you. There is a truth beyond that which we experience. And it is in that faith, in that truth, in our understanding of that there is an unfoldment of that truth that avails to us this power and this presence, that allows Mr. Wright, when he's thinking that he's going to be cured, to experience a cure, that allows Anita Moorjani, when she gets a message that she's going to be whole, perfect, and complete, that she returns, and now she's taking that message out to the world. And you can find that message in the book that she wrote, or you can find it out on the internet. Look her up. She's there. These are true stories. These are people that have taken an understanding of a divine presence in their life and utilized it by allowing the divine to work for them, by working through them. It's available to you. That we must go the way of God and the law is a fundamental tenet of what we teach in New Thought. Because nature obeys us as we first obey it, and our obedience to it is our acceptance of it. How much can we believe? We can believe as much as we can believe that will be done unto us. That's funny. It has a very similar sound to something that was taught 2,000 years ago. As you believe, it will be done unto you. My friends, there is a truism there. Take that to heart. As you believe, unfortunately, for most of us, our beliefs get caught up in lack, in limitation, in a world that has not enough. But did you know? Consider this for a moment. How many grains of sand are there on the face of the earth? I have no idea. Wouldn't even begin to count. But do you know that neuroscientists tell us that we have more nerve connections in our brain? In one single 3-pound human brain, we have more nerve connections in our brain than there are grains of sand on the beaches of the world. Total. Now, why is that important? It's important because we are discovering things about the mind and the brain today, the powers that are available to us through the mind working through the brain, that we're just beginning to peel back the beginning layers of this great thing that we have, this supercomputer. And yet, in New Thought religious science, for the last 100 years, we've been teaching about this power being there. I read somewhere recently that certain conservative beliefs have always ended up on the wrong side of history. You know, whether they believe that, and this is rather severe, but believe that there was a biblical understanding for having slaves, whether there was a biblical understanding why women were second-class citizens, whether there's a biblical understanding why all people who love each other cannot get married. History has shown us that there is a better way. Because the truth is that there is a God that is a better God, a bigger God, a greater God when we open our understanding to that better God, that bigger God, that greater God, and it is available today for you. You know, if you've been living in darkness, if you've been living in sadness, even if it's just the time of year, this seasonal affective disorder, if it has come upon you, it is time to step out into the light. And where do you find that light? Surprisingly enough, you find it within yourself. And you'll find it at New Thought centers. You'll find it at religious science, divine science, unity centers. You can find it in some forms of meditation. There's many different roads. There's many different paths to the top of the mountain that will lead you to the spiritual understanding of who you truly are. But you got to take and you got to walk the walk. You got to do that. You got to take the action. If you happen to catch the show when Terry McBride was with me, and that's another powerful story of someone coming to an understanding of the power that's within him. But one thing that Terry learned through his story was that you have to take the action steps. You cannot sit on your couch. Going to church on Sunday is not going to do it for you. You have got to take responsibility for you and who you are. Bishop Carlton Pearson, watching that show, began to have an understanding, a greater understanding of who he is. And he began to teach that. And he is willing to stand today and teach that even when he is condemned by those who at one time said that they loved him. If you happen to get a chance to watch, there is a movie, and we had the opportunity to interview the producer of the movie. It's called What is New Thought? I highly recommend it. You will get a chance to meet Bishop Carlton Pearson in that. He's got a greater story. There are other people in that movie that you will get a chance to meet if you get a chance to watch it. And I highly recommend that you make the time to find a center, a church, or a place, or purchase it for yourself and watch this movie, because it will share with you an understanding of a truth today that has always been true, but is not always recognized as truth. And on that note, we'll take a break, and I'll see you when we come back. Well, welcome back. I am the Reverend Steve Walling. This is New Thought Talk, and I'm glad you're here today. Before we went to the break, we were talking about Reverend Bishop Carlton Pearson. We were talking about Mr. Wright, Kribayasin. We were talking about Anita Moorjani, and we were talking about the young Heaven Vieos. These are just names. I think, and I believe, that if you think about people in your life, you can probably come up with names, you can probably come up with people that have experienced things in their lives that go maybe just one or two steps beyond normal understanding. You know, before I came to this philosophy of New Thought, I experienced things, people having issues in their life, and I was amazed. How did these things happen? We called them miracles. Well, there aren't any miracles in the world when you begin to understand that what we call miracles is just God doing what God does. And that was the message that this man Jesus brought to the world some 2,000 years ago, that God does what God does. But we have to open ourselves up to that. And when we do, we begin to see miracles unfold in our life. And what a powerful, powerful thought that can be. See, in New Thought, we believe that God is personal to all who feel this indwelling presence, and we believe in the direct revelation of truth through the intuitive and spiritual nature of man, and that any man may become a revealer of truth who lives close in contact with the indwelling God. In other words, the message that came to the world 2,000 years ago is not the end of the story. The story is continuing to unfold through each and every one of us as we express our lives today. The challenge is for us to ask ourselves, how am I experiencing that message, and how is it unfolding through me? What is my purpose for being here? And my purpose for being here is to be the expression that the divine meant for me to be. God created me, God created you and everything else around us so that we can experience all the gifts, all the goodness, and all the godness that God brings to the table. And if you're not, if you're worried, if you live in fear, if you have stress in your life, if you're experiencing lack, limitation, if you are suffering under conditions of disease, there are people in various philosophies and teaching today that will tell you that that's God's will. And I'll tell you that's bunk. You see, there's something other than that. There is the power of the presence of God that works through us. And that God is a God of love. And what's amazing today is we're seeing the unfolding in science. They're finding out that we have powers within us heretofore not understood. We teach things in New Thought like affirmations, we teach things like meditation, we teach things like journaling. Each one of those three things has solid scientific evidence behind it that if you participate in those activities and you happen to be experiencing some kind of a dis-ease condition in your life, that healing can and oftentimes does take place, or if it's in the process of taking place, it takes place at a higher rate of speed heretofore not understood by the medical science professions. You are a divine being, you're a spiritual being, having a physical expression in this that we call life. But you are not limited by this physical expression if you can believe it. At the level of your belief, it is done unto you was the teachings. At the level of our belief today is what we can experience in our lives. That's what I'm here to tell you about today. When I have guests on the show, that's the point that I want you to get. You are an incredible being. You, no matter who you are, no matter what part of the world you're in, are an incredible being. And whatever your religious background, maybe even whatever your religious experience is that you choose to hold on to today, you are still an incredible being. And the God is the God is the God, is the God, is the God. No matter what God you think it is the one God of all. You may not want to share your God with the rest of the world, but there's only one God, so you have no choice. At least that's the way I like to put it. Open yourself up to a greater good, a greater understanding, and you will begin to experience a greater thing that we call life. And that is the reason why I do these shows. That's why I come to you. That's why I share these messages. And I hope that as we go through the shows, and you can go back to YouTube and pick the shows up. If you saw something, you want to watch it again, we have an archive on YouTube. I hope you take the time to do that. I hope you take notes while we're having the show on. I hope that you share the information that you get with other people, because one candle lighting another candle, lighting another candle, and lighting another candle, it doesn't diminish in the brightness of its own light. It just brings more light into the world as it shares from one to another to another. And that is our purpose, to take our light out into the world. In the darkness of this time of year, we don't have to live in the darkness of beingness. We can bring our light to the world. And those people that are experiencing the sad conditions, the seasonal affective disorders, can change it to the glad conditions, the God living, accepting disorder. In other words, allowing God to live through us, to be glad, to be joyful, to be harmonious, to be complete. And that's the point of the story today. But you can do this. And as you do this, maybe you don't know where to go. Maybe you don't know who to see, talk to. This may be your first opportunity to have had any kind of contact with a new thought, belief, and a philosophy. Well, I'm here to tell you that there is a place, several places that you can go on the internet, a lot of places actually, but there's two in particular that I like to promote each week on my show. And one of them is called findacenter.com. Findacenter.com is a place for you to go via the internet where you can find the local New Thought Center nearest to you. Think about this. You might be here in California, or you might be in the middle of Alaska, or you might be in Canada, you might be on the other side of the world. The center that's nearest to you has a listing that you can find in Find a Center. You go there, you'll see the map on the screen, you put your little cursor on it, you click on it, it will open up, and then you'll scroll down and you'll find the information you need below you. If you happen to be a New Thought Center and you didn't know that your center is listed in there, it is. And if for some reason you go there and you find that it's not there, contact those folks, because they'll make sure you get in. They put in every center. They have no flavors or biases that they favor. Everybody gets in, because this message, this new thought understanding is important. It's important that we spread it throughout the world. And if you're part of that world and you want to find it, it's important that you be able to find it. Then, if you find a center, now with the advent of the internet, you have books online that you can get, but they're going to cost you something. And maybe you want to find your way into this, or maybe you're working your way and you're studying, and my goodness, to buy all the books that you may want to study could take a chunk of change. And maybe you're in the process of creating that, but maybe you're not. So you can go to another resource on the internet that's called newthoughtlibrary.com or .org. And if you go to newthoughtlibrary.com or .org, there you will find listed either by book title or by author books that were written by early New Thought pioneers, including people like Phineas Quimby, Emma Curtis Hopkins, the Fillmores, Charles Myrtle, their daughter, Ernest Holmes, his brother Fenwick Holmes, John Bascom's original Science of Mind can be found there, Ralph Waldo Trine, Ralph Waldo Emerson, James Allen. There is just an extensive collection there of New Thought authors and New Thought information that you can read through as you begin to grow your consciousness and the understanding of what New Thought is all about. Because it really is a matter of growing this consciousness within you and understanding. And if you live in darkness, you'll never see the truth that's there available. So you have to take the action. Find these places, look them up, read, study, begin to put things into practice in your life. And I promise you, and I guarantee, your life will change. No doubt about it. You know, we weren't created to live and suffer and then die and hopefully get something beyond this. We were created to live, and to live at the absolute potential that we each have. And that potential comes with the divine authority that is available to each and every one of us. Finally, if you happen to be out in Madera on Sunday morning, 10:30, we meet for celebration at 218 South D Street across from the post office. Love to have you join us for celebration. And, always look forward to seeing new people come through the door. It's nice when people show up that have watched the show and found us for the first time. It's really good. It's time once again. We're at the end of the show, and I could go on for another couple hours, but I'll be back. So we'll get that covered. So as I do each time, and I do this not because it's something I repeat, but because it's something that comes from my heart as I close with this understanding, this prayer of protection for each and every one of you. May the light of God surround you. May the love of God enfold you. May the power of God protect you, and the presence of God watch over you. Because truly, wherever you are, God is. Don't forget that. God is there. And all is well, my friends. Have a great week. I'll see you next time.
CentralValleyTalk.com